The Minnesota State Patrol has reopened the case surrounding the fatal car crash that took the life of Seth Hanson last December. Today, I sat down to talk with his father. December 8th, 2007. 19-year-old Seth Hanson was driving on Highway 75 south of Clinton, out for a night of fun with his friends. Seth and his passenger Heather Lammer were allegedly racing another car driven by Ben Liefert and Greg Larson. The two cars went back and forth passing each other, reaching speeds up to 150 miles per hour. At the time, the drivers had apparently been drinking. Just like that, Seth's car went off the road and flipped over. Heather made it out alive, but when the others went to look for Seth, they say they couldn't find him. The three left the scene before the ambulance arrived. Seth's father, Roger, obtained the cell phone records, but they didn't add up. According to Roger, the records indicate the accident took place at 2:12 a.m., but the 911 call was not made until 2:50 a.m. 1 year later, and still so many unanswered questions remain, like what took so long to make that 911 call, and why would Seth's friends leave him at the scene in temperatures of negative 14 degrees?
I just don't understand how you leave your best friend out there and do this.
Heather, Ben, and Greg are all key witnesses to what really happened that night. But it seems their stories keep changing. Something making the case even more difficult is the fact that the original witness statement has somehow disappeared. Roger has spent the past year searching for answers. He's documented every part of the case in a record book.
Not knowing it just keeps you awake and keeps you thinking, and your mind races. If I can't sleep, I take my book out and I look for something that I've missed someplace.
Although nothing will bring his son back, this father just wants to know the truth about what happened on that fateful night.
I understand my son's gone and he ain't coming back. I just hope by the grace of God that somebody comes forward and tells the truth.
7 years later, the Insider exclusive investigative news team goes behind the headlines in Left to Die, the real Seth Hanson story, to meet with Steve Gabrielson at the Stephen Gabrielson Limited Law Firm, who successfully represented the Hanson family by re-examining all the case evidence and finally getting the truth from the only witnesses, Seth's former so-called friends, who were present at the accident scene on that freezing night and just left him there without calling 911. Those witnesses and so-called friends, Ben Liefert, Heather Lammer, and Greg Larson, variously claimed that there was no race, or that Seth's vehicle was far ahead of the Camaro, or that Seth's vehicle was far behind the Camaro. Instead of calling 911, they called a friend, Andy Coonrath, who drove out to the accident scene. Ben, Greg, and Heather then left the scene, and Andy made the 911 call. The wind-chilled temperature that night was 14 degrees below zero. Seth had been thrown from the car, seriously injured, and was lying in the freezing snow and ice. By the time Seth was taken to the hospital, his body core temperature had dropped to 75 degrees. Steve Gabrielson's discovery of cell phone records explained why. It showed that the accident likely occurred shortly after 2 a.m. The 911 call wasn't made until around 2:50 a.m., 50 minutes after the accident. Yet Seth was still alive upon arriving at the hospital, but he had been in the freezing snow for approximately 50 minutes. He later died from internal injuries and exposure. Steve and his firm were able to discover the real story from the hostile and reluctant witnesses, Seth's so-called former friends. And in this special Insider exclusive Investigative Network TV special, we tell that story with Steve and Seth's father, Roger, who worked diligently for 3 years to help discover the truth himself. Throughout his career, Steve Gabrielson has earned a reputation as an unyielding advocate and lawyer who repeatedly represents individual men, women, and families to search out the truth in the name of justice. And he repeatedly wins. Steve has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Sartell, in Minnesota, and across the country. The Insider Exclusive news team uncovered that no other attorney in the St. Cloud Brainerd area has tried as many cases for injury victims as he has in the past 20 years. And Steve's experience has allowed him to earn both state and national certification as a civil trial specialist, an award granted to less than 1% of Minnesota attorneys. He has tried cases in more than 20 Minnesota counties and has won large settlements for clients throughout Minnesota and other states, and has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. Steve's spirit and dedication is often compared to President Teddy Roosevelt, especially when it comes to being in the courtroom in the arena he knows so well. For as Steve often says, it is not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbled or whether the doer of deeds could have done it better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in a worthy cause, daring greatly so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. Steve's amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Sartell, Minnesota.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Steve Gabrielson to the show. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about the type of law your law firm practices.
I'm a personal injury attorney. I run a one-man shop with my primary office in the St. Cloud area in Minnesota, actually in Sartell right now. I have a branch office up in Brainerd, Minnesota.
When researching this show, we noticed that you were a certified civil trial specialist.
That's right.
Most lawyers aren't that. What is it, and why is it important to the everyday average person looking for a lawyer?
Only a few attorneys in Minnesota, percentage-wise, qualify to become certified as a civil trial specialist. Less than 1% of attorneys in Minnesota have earned both national and state certification. I have both certifications. You only gain them by trying lots of cases, passing rigorous tests, and being recommended by judges. Then you have to be recertified to demonstrate that you have ongoing experience. Really, the difference is that an attorney who's certified is guaranteed to a prospective client to be somebody who has had lots of experience and has demonstrated proficiency.
Speaking of cases, today we are here discussing the Seth Hanson case.
Right.
Tell our audience who Seth Hanson was.
Seth died when he was 19 years old. He died in December of 2007. His dad came to see me almost 3 years later to the date. That's an important date because Minnesota has a 3-year statute of limitations for wrongful death claims.
Right.
Less than a half a week before the statute was going to run, Roger came in to see me.
And tell our audience a little bit about Seth's story.
Well, Seth was 19 years old. He had graduated from high school, and now he had returned to Ortonville to visit his dad out in western Minnesota and to see some of his high school friends. He was going to get together with his friends, and then he was going to move out to Colorado, where he had been accepted at Colorado Technical University.
And what happened with the case? He was out racing one night with his friends?
Yeah. Seth and his friends partied that afternoon and that night, and they were driving. And alcohol and driving are a bad combination. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we believe that from cell phone transcripts, or cell phone records rather, and 9/11 dispatch transcripts, there was going to be a race between two vehicles. Seth's vehicle, a Chrysler 300 with a 6-cylinder engine, and a vehicle owned by one of his friends, which was a Camaro that had an LS1 engine,
Yeah.
which means that's a Corvette engine in the Camaro.
Right, and I'm going to interject here. You said one of his friends, one
That's
of
right.
his so-called friends.
That's probably a better way to put it.
So there were 2 cars.
That's right.
They were all had been drinking.
That's right.
They were driving down the road at excessive speeds, and what happened?
Well, that's a good question. What did happen? Because after the accident, we know that 4 people were involved, and we know now that 2 vehicles were involved.
Yes.
But after the accident, the other 3 kids left Seth out at the scene of the accident.
And he was out in the snow, wasn't he?
14 below with
Yeah.
a wind chill
Right.
in Minnesota, December.
And rather than call the police or call someone,
They called a friend.
they called a friend.
He came out there.
They didn't want to call the police, I only can guess, because they had been drinking.
That's right.
And they didn't want the cops to know that they had been drinking.
Plus, they'd been involved in a terrible accident. Now, Seth at that time was still alive,
Yes.
but he's lying in the ditch in the snow probably for as long as 40 minutes
Yeah.
before the 9/11 call is made.
So he ends up at the hospital. I understand he was still alive.
That's right, but his core temperature was about 75 degrees.
Yeah.
Seth's dad, Roger, learned from the doctor who performed the autopsy on Seth that Seth would likely not have survived of his injuries, although to look at him, you would be hard-pressed to find physical evidence of injury. He had
Right.
internal injuries from being thrown from his vehicle.
So when his dad brought you the case, and unfortunately Seth passed on, what were the challenges that you were faced with?
Oh, massive challenges. We had hostile and reluctant witnesses.
These were the so-called friends.
Yeah, the 3 friends that were with him. By the way, the case was initially reported as a 1-vehicle rollover.
The police were wrong.
That was what they were told
Yeah.
by the kid who called the 9/11.
Yeah.
He described it as a 1-vehicle accident. Well, he knew different because he'd sent the other 3 away. But those kids came to check on Seth at the hospital. It was discovered that, in fact, 2 vehicles had been involved, but there was no admission at that point regarding any misconduct on the part of the people operating the other car. And we never did get stories straight from those kids. Every time they talked to the police, they gave different stories.
There was conflicting stories.
That's
What
right.
were some of the difficulties that you had in this case? You successfully settled the case against some insurance companies, but what were some of the difficulties you were never able to resolve?
Well, Roger always wondered if Seth was even driving his own car.
Really?
And there would be reason to think that. Seth smoked. If you look at the photographs of the Chrysler, the back window is rolled part way down. Now, on a December night at 2 in the morning, why would the back window be rolled part way down unless somebody's smoking? You're surely not going to be driving with the window down on a race going anywhere from 90 to 120 miles an hour. So Roger wondered if Seth was in the back seat of his own vehicle.
Right.
Those issues finally got resolved to my satisfaction by taking many depositions. That's what I found that I needed to do with Seth's case, is to try to break down the stories of the other 3 kids and
Right.
come to a story that would provide the truth and some peace to Roger and his wife, and his former wife,
Right.
regarding what had actually happened to their son.
Did these so-called friends ever tell the truth?
We don't know.
Yeah.
But I think we presented enough evidence to make a compelling case
Yeah.
that, in fact, what had happened on this race was that just prior to ending the race, the road curved slightly to the left, and it appeared that the Mustang had passed the Chrysler at high speed at that point, causing the Chrysler to move over to the right, where it caught snow, went out of control, crossed the road, and flipped several times. And we had enough evidence of that so that I was able to get basically every insurance policy that would potentially have been available for Seth paid. There was some dispute with respect to a policy maintained by a young man named Ben Liefert, who was probably the driver of the other vehicle.
Right.
His insurance carrier went bankrupt, and in fact, his own insurance carrier brought an action against him in South Dakota.
Really?
Yeah, trying to get a determination that they had no duty to defend him because he had not cooperated with them or even told them of his involvement in this accident. And a district court over there granted that motion. The case was dismissed against him, but we started a new one in Minnesota and managed to negotiate a settlement with the trustee handling the bankruptcy of that insurance carrier.
Well, this is probably a very emotional case for you, as well as Seth's dad, Roger, who we now have with us today, and we're going to bring him on right now.
Great.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Roger Hanson to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about, you did a very extensive personal investigation of what happened to your son after the police made an incorrect assumption about what happened. It took 3 years, roughly, didn't it?
Yes.
Tell our audience what you discovered during that time.
Well, I discovered that, you know, these kids were changing their stories and they weren't jiving together.
Mm-hmm.
Their statements, they changed every time, you know, the sheriff's department or highway patrol would do another statement. They would change their story.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started looking into everything to find out the truth.
Before you brought Steve on, you went to these so-called friends, right?
Yes.
And you asked them, you must have said, hey, I hope you can understand, you know, I'm Seth's father, and I really want to know what happened out there. They just out and out lied to you, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And they, you know, they all claimed they were Seth's best friend.
Yeah.
And they just actually lied.
Yeah.
You know?
What was their answer to the question, if you were his best friend and you were there? They did admit they were there, right?
Yes.
If you were there, why didn't you call the police? Why did you call one of your friends to call? What did they say to that?
Well, they just said, well, we had to get Heather to the hospital, and I says,
Heather was in your son's car.
yeah, supposedly, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you, right now, you know, you're on national TV. What would you say to parents when they watch over their kids and to prevent accidents like this?
Well, to make sure they're not drinking and driving, and they don't have access, and their kids aren't hanging around with the wrong crowd that have the access that the kids can get from them, because that's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I come from a small town, and there's basically nothing to do for kids, and they should have something for kids to do, you know, after school and at night and stuff especially.
How has your life changed as a result of Seth's passing?
Well, I still hear that doorbell every day, 3:30 in the morning. You just wake up and you can't go back to sleep, and it's always going to be there. And it doesn't hurt just me. It hurts everybody that Seth's life has touched.
Steve did a great job helping you with the investigation. I know he went to extensive lengths to find out the truth. What is your opinion of Steve's law firm?
Steve did a real great job, I believed, and he took the case when basically we were out of time to file for this. And Steve was very interested in it, and I believe the only reason that he did take it is because he believed all the research I did, and just basically jumped right in there.
Yeah, you mentioned that when he came to you a week before the statute of limitations was going to expire, that he had done such a great job. It was almost the entire case.
He had done a lot.
Yeah. You mentioned also you videotaped every one of the depositions, correct?
Yeah, I thought it was very important for Roger to be able to see what was going on in the depositions and to look at it in the future if he wanted to. His was a search for truth. And we still didn't get completely straight stories from all of the kids that were involved in the accident. But at least now he's got him with hard questions that are being asked to kids, not softball questions. And so we have a pretty good idea, we think, of what happened, and we were able to resolve the claim, winning our legal claim, and then Roger then was able to do what he wanted to do with getting some messages out there with his settlement proceeds.
Yeah, Roger, real briefly, what do you think happened that night?
Well, I believe all the kids lied in the first place, and that's what got me to investigate everything with the highway patrol and the sheriff's department, the county attorney, the local police department, and everything just didn't jive. And I found out that they had lost files and just, you know, and I asked where they were, you know. I mean, I needed those. I needed the information for myself and, you know, to make everything complete. And miraculously, after a year went by, they found them. And so that made me want to do more research, and I have just an extensive research book on.
And you should. It's your son.
Yes, and it. I don't think we left no stone unturned.
No, when you think that from at least from the criminal process that you were pursuing for 3 years, the only thing that resulted from this was a speeding ticket for one of those kids.
Right. Well, they're going to have to live with it because we all kind of know what they did. You know, they left their so-called friend there.
Well, it's not only they left him there, they left him there in 14 below and sat out there for 38 minutes before they left.
Yeah.
And just, you know, I mean, he could have been saved.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on this program. It means a lot to us. It means a lot to me. And for any parent out there who has a child that, you know, that they've lost, it means a lot to them too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Steve, when you take on a case, there's a lot of people that call you up. And when you take on a case, what are the three most important aspects that you look at about whether you want to handle a case or not?
I look at who the plaintiff is. I look at the facts of the case to determine whether or not there's a liability claim to assert, because many times accidents can happen with no liability.
Yeah.
But I also then will look at what the damages are. And in the case involving Seth Hanson, clearly it was a case that, while it presented tremendous obstacles in proving liability under a specific statute having to do with racing in Minnesota, the damages were horrendous. This accident had consumed Roger and his former wife Sharon for a number of years because of the circumstances of
they wanted to know the
death.
truth.
They had to know it.
Yeah. Well, you did a fantastic job for them.
Thank you.
And if ever I was in a situation, I'd certainly call you regarding this because you're dedicated to this. And I want to thank you very much for being on our show.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at InsiderExclusive.com.